The first point about iwi, I didn't mention, they are incredibly important, but so is every community in the country. And iwi are particularly important as the first people of this nation and everything that's embodied in the Waitangi Tribunal. But the fact I didn't mention them means that it doesn't mean that I don't see them as relevant. I didn't mention all the other communities in the country either. I'm talking about New Zealand as a whole. But in terms of how we are, there are glimmers of hope about how we are trying to bring all parties together on these issues, of which the Land and Water Forum is the best example. So while there's there's a very big focus on what the Maori councils are arguing in front of the Waitangi Tribunal at the moment, which is very important, that completely ignores the fact that all water policy is up in the air. Because what the Land and Water Forum is about to propose to the government on water allocation, pricing and trading is a very substantial change if the government chooses to embrace it. So that's why I was only dealing at that broader level rather than coming down to Maori. In terms of scale, do you mean scale in terms of local government? Okay. I think it's very interesting that, let me back up one. I think it's really worth going back once in a while to read what Peter Salmon and his colleagues on the Royal Commission for Auckland wrote about how a change of governance structure can change political culture. I'm seeing that in Auckland. I'm seeing that very successful in Auckland, a lot to work through. I find it incredibly interesting we now have one council for 1/3 of the population in the country and 77 councils for the other 2/3. What I think is going on, what I hope is going on, is that as the Royal Commission suggested, you can change political culture. And we've got a long way to go in Auckland yet, where the council works well with the local boards. If we get that right, I hope that's a model that other people would want to try, so you can get that very considerable local representation and power and ability to do stuff through the local board, but you're still working in that bigger whole. So I don't know what the ideal number for governance is, but it's not amalgamation for the sake of some kind of efficiency. It's a change of structure to get a change of political culture.
In my take on it, when I use the word communities, and it's intended to cover all types of communities. Now, I know that a lot of iwi say we're not community, we're iwi, but in terms of having, I think, useful discussions, you need some generic terms that are understood to cover a very wide range of groups. So it's when I'm talking community governance, for example, I'm talking, among other things, how councils relate with iwi or hapu. On size is one of these things that gets people really confused with local government. First point, we don't spend enough time thinking about the inherent differences between local democracy and efficient delivery of services. In France, there are something like 55,000 communes as the basic element of local government. That's 1,500 people per unit on average. But they look at scale through outsourcing and techniques of that kind. In California, the contract cities movement is small councils who don't deliver any services themselves. They buy in from other councils, from the third sector, from the private sector. Again, their statement is local democracy matters. We want to make our choices for our place. On the other hand, we want to be efficient. Second point, when we talk about local government, we talk about it as though it's homogenous, as though it's whatever it is, it's dealing with the same sorts of issues. There are actually three, I think, distinct tiers. Boundaries are fuzzy, but they're important. One is, what structure do you use for taking regional metropolitan-wide decisions? Second, what structure at what I call the service delivery level? Third, what have you got in place at the community governance level? Now, in terms of changing the political culture across New Zealand, the standout issue is how do we develop the confidence and the trust in each other to say we need strong regional bodies on the things that matter regionally. And some of that's about environmental and catchment management, some of it's about transport, some of it is how you really take seriously regional needs in areas ranging from tertiary education to economic development. And by economic development, I do not mean the kind of small business support that qualifies as economic development in most of local government. So we need to be very disciplined in our thinking, and typically across local government, we haven't been. I'm not sure why. I think it's because central government itself doesn't make those kinds of distinctions, and it's partly because we haven't had that long, hard look at what are we trying to do here, and fundamentally, what are our core values? I differ slightly with one of the things that Rod said. I don't think local government is necessarily in a situation of having to wait for government to say, yes, you can do this. I think the critical issue for local government is to build the trust and partnership with its community so that local government has the strength to speak on behalf. And it's the Henry Ford situation in this space. It's a cliche, but it's a good one. If you think you can't, you're right. And that's, I suspect, where local government largely is at the moment. But the other thing he said is, and if you think you can, you're right. And that's the challenge for local government. I think at the metropolitan level, Auckland is an immense challenge now for central government. And I think that my sense is that there's a lot of feeling in Wellington around, my God, what have we done here? That's right. Because the balance of influence has dramatically changed, and it will continue to change. And Auckland, I believe, will get what Auckland is seeking.
Is there any reason to believe that that doesn't apply elsewhere?
I don't think so. Not if there is sufficient demonstration of political will and public support. And the reason the government, I think, is able to do what it's doing at the moment is because it genuinely believes, and it's got the polling and other evidence to support it, that that's what the public want. And my take on that is that better local government brought that on itself. It brought it on itself because it has not put the investment into building the support base in its communities in a real and genuine way. It doesn't have the business community out there rooting for it, saying, look, local government actually matters. It has the business community out there saying, sort these guys out. And I believe genuinely that's because local government, structured, as I said earlier, as a monopoly provider of services, hasn't really faced consciously the need to build its support base and to understand the power of a strong support base. Let's hope that changes.
Yeah, I'm glad Peter's optimistic about Auckland changing the government's mind. My sense is that it's going to take, until National loses half its seats in Auckland, particularly some of the safe ones on the North Shore, I don't think they will get the message, but at that point they'll have lost power anyway. I seriously think that, I don't spend, I'm not a political journalist, I don't spend lots of time around, I talk a lot with politicians about policy, not so much about politics. But that's my sense of how stuck we are. And if it's hard for us, it's impossible for other people around the country. But just reflect on where we are in this building. If you look at how this building and the rowing centre and other things have come about, a large part of, an important factor in there was major regional economic initiatives that were available in the past. This government has no interest in that at all. All the resource is going into that central strategy. So that's where I think that this is a government that's just pulled so much back to the centre that it's really deeply constraining the rest of the country. Yeah. I'm still trying to work out the right words here because whilst I think being able to work with complexity, to understand what's going on, to devise the solutions for that, get people on board with that, does actually require dealing with those issues in ways that people can connect to. Now, as a journalist, the basis on which I work is that if something can be explained, some things can't be, God or whatever, but if something can be explained, it can be explained in a way that doesn't oversimplify or distort the basic issues at stake. So that's how I approach journalism. So therefore, I'm convinced it's possible to take the most complicated issues and work through them in ways that people can get to grips with. And then the outcome you want and the action you want has got to be direct and simple, but it's not simplistic. It's the difference between being simple and simplistic. And my concern is we're being far too simplistic about core services and you name it, and somehow appointed councillors or commissioners is going to change things dramatically.
If I can just add a point to that, there's a growing sort of recognition, and the Australians have been doing some work in this area, that a lot of the challenging issues we now face, dealing with climate change is one, requires behaviour change. And it's behaviour change that people have to voluntarily adopt. You can't force that kind of change. And it follows from that you actually need to engage hearts and minds. So the sense is that you're moving to a situation where you actually do need ongoing dialogue, and you need to work out, who are the leaders to work with, who are the opinion seekers, those who will be champions for what you're trying to do. And it's a multi-year process. It's not, someone pops out to a cabinet press conference and says X is going to happen tomorrow. Life is not like that. I don't think, have yet caught up with that. Our system of government is too focused on the idea still that you can run a command and control approach to issues where you're actually you're needing to get people to say, I've thought about that, and yes, I think I will do that. And that's the challenge that we face in a lot of the stuff now.
Sorry to jump back in, but to build on what Peter's said there, and I'll go back to the Land and Water Forum as an example of how through that collaborative process, through that dialogue, immensely complicated issues have been very well thought through and everybody's on board with it. And that to me is the excellent place to be, because whilst I think regulation is really important and has its place, good regulation, the issues we're now dealing with, whether it be climate change or environmental ones, whatever, are so complex that ain't no way we're ever going to write regulations to make that work. People have got to act, they've got to decide on things because they understand what the right thing to do is, not what's required by regulation. We're seeing it in the financial sector. It's going to be, you can't regulate behaviour there. Sorry, you do need regulations, but that won't work. People have got to understand and want to do pretty much the right thing.
Well, thanks very much. We're probably going to break for morning tea in a couple of minutes, but could I just ask everyone to show their appreciation again for Rod and Peter?
Thanks very much.